Hi, everyone. It's Wednesday, July 5th, and I am making this video to provide you with an answer to the cliffhanger question that I posed to you on Sunday, or you may have seen the video on Monday, asking about this concept of memory and communion, and have we somehow made communion light in some ways because of our focus simply on memory without a deeper inclusion of mystery or spiritual significance. And so the way I've solved this for myself within the Protestant tradition is I have focused on this word anamnesis. Now, I know this word may not be familiar to you. It's a Greek term, but it's important because it's actually a term that Paul used in 1 Corinthians 11:24. That will be a very familiar verse for you, I'm sure. It reads, "And when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, 'Take, eat, this is my body, which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance,'" and he uses the word anamnesis, "of me." And again, that's 1 Corinthians 11:24. That's a verse that in my home church, we say that every time before we take communion. And it's an important verse, but I think, as I've suggested, my home church tends to focus more on this idea of remembrance or memory. And I think it misses the deeper concept there of anamnesis. And I'll explain to you what I mean. Anamnesis actually means to make effective in the present an event in the past. So I turn to the Anglican Roman Catholic International Commission for a little bit more flavor on this. They say that the notion of memorial, as understood in the Passover celebration at the time of Christ, i.e. the making effective in the present of an event in the past. So they repeat that whole definition. And there are others who contend that it means not simply to make a past event effective, but actually to make the past event present. And so I go on to take a look at what the Catholics have to say, because they've dealt with this subject, I think, maybe more so in more depth than some of the Protestants. The famous Catholic theologian Dom Gregory Dix has spoken on this in his famous book, The Shape of the Liturgy, and he says that in our usage of remembrance or memorial, it has the meaning of only mental recollection of something that is absent. He then claims that in antiquity, there was a more dynamic understanding of this term. And he says we have to take account of the clear understanding, then general, in a largely Greek-speaking church of the word anamnesis as meaning a recalling or a representing of a thing in such a way that it is not so much regarded as being absent as itself presently operative by its effects. This is the sense in which the Latin memoria, the Latin term memoria, and its cognates do not adequately translate. In other words, there was a Greek word for memory, and Paul could have used that word, and he did not. Instead, he chose to use this word anamnesis. And we don't have a word that adequately translates that in our current English language. And so we rely on this idea of memory or remembrance, but it doesn't fully capture the true meaning of anamnesis. Dix goes on to say, "It is in this active sense, therefore, of recalling or representing before God the sacrifice of Christ, and thus making it here and now operative by its effects in the communicants, that the Eucharist is regarded both by the New Testament and by the second century writers as the anamnesis of the Passion, or of the Passion and Resurrection combined. In other words, we're making Christ's Passion and Resurrection. We should be, in the communion, present and effective in the here and now. Christ's Passion moves up to our time as we take the bread and drink the wine. So this idea of this fluidity of time and this, past time being in the present makes me think of, there's another type of, there are other people that think this way, and because of my experience studying the medievals, it makes me think of their sense of time. The medieval sense of time is a sense of God's time, which included the past, the present, and the future all in one. And in this concept of time, it was perfectly logical, for instance, to have Christ stepping out of his tomb onto the helmets of medieval knights, as he does in many medieval paintings. But I've provided you in the notes that I've attached on Canvas. I've provided you with an image of the dispenser retable. This is a particular medieval image that I am familiar with. I've seen it a couple of times now, at least, as I visited the Norwich Cathedral. The Norwich Cathedral is an amazing cathedral, medieval cathedral in Norwich, England. And this is one of the rare, really beautiful medieval works of art that depicts various stages of Christ's life. And in one of the stages, in one of the depictions, Christ is stepping out of his tomb and onto basically the head, onto the helmet of a medieval knight, like a knight in shining armor. And now, okay, we could think, okay, they're just medievals. They were just confused, right? They didn't know what Roman guards looked like. No, in fact, they really did. They did know that Roman guards didn't look like medieval knights. But they had this sense of all time being present time. Christ was in the here and now. And thus he could interact with people that had contemporary, like of that time, clothing on. So it would make perfect sense to them that Christ was present in the here and now, and therefore he would be stepping out of his tomb onto the head of someone dressed in their time, which would be a medieval knight. So have we lost this sense of God's time? Have we lost this sense of the past, present, and future coming together? I say yes, for the most part. We have lost this idea of time, and as a result, in some ways, we've lost this idea of Christ being here, being present with us in real time. And perhaps our lackadaisical approach to communion shares the blame for this. Some, however, are trying to change that. Some contemporary, like 20th, 21st century writers are trying to change that. For instance, and they're not all Catholics either, for instance, G. Thomas Holbrooks, the Baptist theologian, has attempted to recover the early Baptist understanding of the Lord's Supper and states that the English translation of, here's our word, anamnesis, means to recall or represent the past event in such a way as to make it currently operative, to make its power available in the here and now. And I'm in a way kind of mispronouncing intentionally represent as represent, just to emphasize this. So Holbrooks goes on to say, communion is more than a bare memorial that calls to remembrance something which happened long ago. It is a remembrance that draws the fullness of God's past action in Christ into the present moment with power so that believers experience anew God's reconciling love. Anamnesis, therefore, the act of making the past present in the present, allows us to experience Christ in the present moment with power. So this is not, now I'm going to take you back to your favorite book for the week And this is not unlike what N.T. Wright says in his book. However, he doesn't use the word anamnesis. He's trying to, write a book for lay people, so he doesn't use words that might put off lay people. But he does say on the bottom of page 55, you might want to take a look at this on your own. He says, in particular, you may grasp the meaning of the strange phrase, do this in remembrance of me. That doesn't just mean remembering Jesus and his death. We do not simply recall the events of Calvary with our minds and hearts in faith and love and awe, though we should certainly do that every time we come to Jesus' table. It means somehow Jesus is present, that his one-off death is made contemporary with us. The unique past event rushes forward to accompany us on our journey. So you can see that N.T. Wright is also talking about this idea of anamnesis. Worth taking a look at, page 55. And he goes on to talk about this concept of how the future comes to the present moment as well. Take a look in chapter 11. You should check out the paragraph that begins on page 58 with take that image. So it's the middle paragraph, page 58. Take a look at that. I love the image of the rushing train here that Wright uses. He uses the concept of time being a rushing train. That seems to work for me. He seems to capture exactly what we've been talking about here with the word anamnesis. So the other thing, a couple more ideas that I want you to think about. The other thing that I want you to think about is the historical importance of communion. And have we somehow diminished communion? We kind of tack it on at the end of a service. We kind of do our service and then, oh yeah, before you go, we have to do communion. And a lot of times I've gone to some churches where they just hand out like a little cup of grape juice with the little wafer on the top. You pull open the wafer, there's and you just eat everything, drink everything all at once. It takes about, a minute of the service, and then they go on with the music and the lights and the show and the service and the message. But communion is like, a really short piece of the service. And are we missing something by making it such a short piece of the service? Certainly, in the past, in the early church, it suggested that it was a much more significant aspect of the Christian way of life. And so in some ways, Wright echoes what these early Christian writers were saying. And so if you take a look, I know I said it was optional, but you might take a look quickly at the Christianity Today article. The first person they quote is Justin Martyr. And Justin Martyr is writing here, his document, I believe, is dated from around 150. But anyway, what he says is he clearly contemplates Christ's presence in the bread and wine, but he also thinks of it as a present remembrance of him. So what I quote in my notes, and I'll post these notes so you can take a look at it, but I won't read it to you. It's a long quote. Is Martyr's concept where he talks about the common, we don't receive bread and wine as just common bread and common wine, but we receive them as Christ's presence, as part of Christ, and that Jesus nurtures us through this action. And so clearly for Justin Martyr, this act of communion was very, very important. And not everybody agreed with Justin Martyr about how Christ was present in the bread and the wine, but they certainly agreed about the importance of the bread and the wine. And you can take a look on in chapter 12 of Wright's book, as he talks about how, we haven't always agreed about the meaning, but we all agree that it's important, or at least hopefully we do. However, what's clear is Wright makes clear that communion is a time when Christ is present and he's feeding us with himself. Take a look at page 66 for that. And then what I want you to think about is this also shows up in another really significant Bible story. Think of the road to Emmaus. Think about when does Christ become visible to the disciples? When do they figure out who he is? When do they perceive his presence? So my hint is to take a look at Luke 24:30 through 31. Might be important for this concept that I'm talking about here. So as I suggested above, Justin Martyr's quote, and this is from his work First Apology, dated to the year 155, points to the power of the Eucharistic tradition for the early church. Prior to 300, communion was an actual meal. So in the early church, people would actually sit down, have a meal, and then they would bless the bread and bless the wine, and that would be part of the meal. So it was only after 330 with Constantine that the Eucharistic meal could be celebrated in public and as part of a ceremony or service. And so it did move out of being part of a meal, and it became a special Eucharistic ceremony. Even so, there's extraordinary physical evidence of communion being a central part of the church's liturgy from this very early time. So last February, I went to New York to see this exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was a special exhibit of chalices and other Eucharistic implements. And I believe that these things really serve to demonstrate the significance of Eucharist for the Byzantine Church. Now, keep in mind, the Byzantine Church is going back to the 4th and 5th, as early as the 4th and 5th centuries. And these artifacts may look like they're medieval. I've included a picture which I've posted along with my lecture notes. It's inside my lecture notes that I'll post on Canvas. They look medieval. They're not medieval. They're so early. They're like from the 300s, the 400s, the 500s. The artwork and the use of precious metals in these chalices demonstrates, I think, the centrality of this ritual for the Byzantine Church. So take a look. I included just one photo of these. I've got many, many, many more photos. So if you're interested, email me and I will be happy to forward more photos of chalices and other Eucharistic implements to you. So the further evidence of the centrality of communion to the early church lies in the Didache. The Didache is an anonymous Christian collection of prayers and sayings that scholars debate as to when it was really written. Some say it was written as early as the year 50, which was really early. Others say it dates to as late as the year 120. Anyway, a prayer in the Didache reads, quote, "As this broken bread was scattered upon the mountains, but was brought together and became one, so let the church be gathered together from the ends of the earth into thy kingdom, for thine is the glory and the power through Jesus Christ forever." So this prayer, for me, raises questions beyond this concept of just memory and anamnesis to questions of the church itself. And my question for you is, have we allowed communion to unite us, or has it divided us? Think about it. So what I thought I would do now is just read a quick quote that I'm not going to include in the notes because it's just a quote from a writer that I happen to agree with, who says, you know, previously I approached this meal with a clean heart and a conscience, understanding that it was simply a memorial, a symbolic observance, and this was kind of my approach prior to really thinking through the significance of communion. Now I draw near the table and I see so much more: an altar, a cross, a place sacred where my mortal world intersects with the spiritual realm, where past, present, and future merge. It's a table set before me in the presence of my enemies, a feast in which my cup overflows. So the bread becomes manna from heaven. It becomes the bread from the basket of a little boy, a Passover observance with Jesus, a taste of the future. And then the juice or the wine is not just blood. It's the blood that appeared on the doorstep in Egypt during the Passover, the blood that flowed down Calvary's cross. It's this repeated imagery of blood as well in the Old and New Testament. It is a meal taken not in solitude, but in the presence of the saints of the past, a rehearsal for the banquet that is yet to come. It is a meal that spans time and space, unchanged for 2 millennia. Real presence, spiritual presence, or memorial presence? That question has been debated for centuries with subtle nuances almost too close to distinguish. Yet the spiritual effects of the Lord's Supper transcend human disputes and understanding. Indeed, there is more to the Lord's Supper than what I once thought. I invite you to join me on this journey and let us renew the art of anamnesis. So anyway, I thought that he expressed very well what I've been thinking and what I've been feeling this week as I've thought about communion and about memory and about anamnesis and about the importance of or the significance of communion. So don't forget, Sunday you will go and participate with your church or another church in the Eucharistic ritual. Whether they call it Eucharist or communion or the Lord's Supper, whatever they call it, you're going to participate. But you're going to have all these things in your head, and you're going to be thinking about N.T. Wright's book, the scriptures that I've assigned, this lecture, and you'll be parsing through and sorting out, how are you experiencing this in your heart, but how do you understand it in your head? So, and then hopefully all of that will come together for you in a beautiful and literate post, which I look forward to reading. So hang in there. Email me if you have any questions. Blessings on your week, and I'll be in touch soon. Take care.